This is going to be a little bit of a harder video, but I promised Ben I'd have an answer today. It's now the next morning. This is a little bit of a harder video. So if it seems like I'm struggling, I am. There are nights when you wish you could have a drink. I'm not a drinker, and I don't even have a drop in the house. If I did, I would be having it to make this a little easier, but I'm just going to have to go through. So if it seems like I'm struggling telling this story, I am really struggling. This is a really hard one to tell. So, background. The other day I did a video talking about how when a little guy, like a young, brave, talented, heroic writer like Ben or Tammy or Nate is facing a lawsuit, probably from a big, powerful firm that costs a lot of money, it's a little like being a shark. And if you can afford a lawyer, probably the best you're going to be able to afford is a little clownfish. Ben must have seen the video or part of it and asked me the question, if you had to pick a Saskatchewan clownfish, who would you pick? And this video is going to be a really long answer to that question because I have to tell you the story of Jane Smith, which really hurts, because what happened to Jane Smith was the worst judicial crime I have ever personally seen. And it was a guy named Justice Grant Curry, who, whenever I tell people that this happened, they always have the same reaction. Grant Curry did that? It's inexplicable to me too. So, long story short, Grant Curry, in the case of Jane Smith, came up with this atrocious, appalling, horrible decision that just can't be explained any other way than that somebody bought him off to write it. And like, this is coming from somebody, literally, my father was a lawyer, my mother was a lawyer, both my grandfathers were lawyers. My father's father before him was a lawyer. His father before him was a court registrar in Battleford. So the law is in my DNA. So I didn't just go public with this and get capped on a whim. This was some seriously bad stuff, something seriously rotten in the state of Denmark. And I hate having to dox Grant Curry. I don't even know why I hate having to do it, but the whole story is just gross. Okay, so a little background on Jane Smith. Not her real name, of course. I'm not allowed to tell you her real name because it was a divorce file, child involved. Okay, so Jane Smith, married to John Howe, typical early middle-aged Canadian couple living on a farm in Saskatchewan. They have a little son. There's a domestic violence incident. So Jane Smith, who is about 98 pounds soaking wet, and John Howe being a typical, not huge, but much bigger than Jane Smith, a beefy, strong Canadian guy. Jane Smith is a survivor of domestic violence at the hands of John. It's bad enough that Jane has to get in the car and run away and never come back. It gets way worse than this. Oh my goodness. Okay. So the case winds its way through litigation. I wasn't involved in the case until the very end, until right before trial. Jane had maybe one or two lawyers before me that sucked thousands of dollars out of her. I'm not saying they were bad lawyers at all. I don't know who her lawyers were before me, but it's the nature of lawyers that you suck money out of people. So Jane has to get somebody for the trial. She gets me. I come in sort of at the ninth inning. I'm like the closer. I'm like your Dennis Eckersley, except, it was a blown save if you're looking at it through that way. Although I don't blame myself. Oh, this one's a tough one to tell. So, the issues basically at trial are child custody of the one child, who gets the house, who gets the farm, who gets the money, who gets child support, does anybody get spousal support, does anybody get costs? And a lot of things could have happened that could have been reasonable. A lot of things could have happened that could have been bad or could have been good. This is actually what happened, what I'm showing you now. and this actually happened in Saskatchewan about 2 years ago. I don't remember what it was exactly. This is what Grant Curry did. I have to laugh so I don't cry about how atrocious it is. So this may not be crazy to you as non-lawyers, but if you asked any family lawyer, they would just shake their heads and go, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. That's not feasible. That's not possible. That could not have happened. And I know it could not have happened, and yet it did. Ouch. Okay. It gets even worse than that, though. Because what Curry didn't mention in his decision that I remember, but it was explored very extensively at trial, is that John was a bit of a coke fiend, a cocaine addict, and had spent a lot of money on cocaine. So John had a lot of debt. And I'm not saying all the debt was cocaine debt, but I'm just saying if you look at a person who has a lot of personal debt and a person who had a lot of cocaine in his life, those two things may be related. That's all I'm saying. But Curry didn't get into any of that. So he used John's high personal debt as a reason why Jane shouldn't get any of the family home, which he knows is illegal. And I know is illegal. And John's lawyer knew was illegal. And probably anybody you could have thrown a rock at in the parking lot across from the courthouse would have known is illegal. Everybody knew it was illegal. So I kind of think that looking on the bright side of what Curry did, it might have been like a call for help. Maybe not a personal call for help, but like the legal system being so broken that this was a call for help, saying, please put us right, somebody. So the decision was so unbelievably bad. And by that time, Jane's completely out of money. So you're wondering, well, does Jane appeal? Jane couldn't appeal. She didn't have any money. I tried to run the appeal for her for free. Like I ran it pro bono, but there were expenses and disbursements. Like she had to pay for a transcript. So the Court of Appeal threw it out without even looking at it because she didn't have money for a transcript. And honestly, I didn't have money for a transcript at that point. Although lawyers have, I think, generally a hard and fast rule that you don't pay out-of-pocket expenses for a client, and that's a good rule. So you don't end up like John Travolta at the end of a civil action.
What you're asking your creditors to believe with this petition is, well, it's hard to believe.
I know.
That after 17 years of practicing law, all you have to show for it is, what, $14 in a checking account and a portable radio?
That's correct.
So, Ben, and if anybody else is watching this, might be wondering, well, who was John Howe's lawyer? Who was the shark representing John Howe? Why don't you dox and name and shame that person? And I don't want to do that. Not just because I don't want to, I don't think it's right. John Howe had what I would refer to as, we'll just call her bodacious blonde barrister babe. Every big firm had one or two or three, bodacious blonde barrister babes. These are like really high achieving, really high agency women who are really good at what they do. They work really hard. Here's where you got to be really careful. Just because I'm saying that Curry was bought, either Curry was bought or somebody had something on him, like the Harkonnens had something on Dr. Yua in Dune, where Dr. Yua did something that was against his imperial conditioning, but that was because his wife had been kidnapped and tortured.
I'm sorry, my lord. But I've made a bargain with the Baron. The Harkonnens have my wife, Mona. They take her apart like a doll.
I don't know, but something horribly corrupt happened with Curry. That doesn't mean that John's lawyer, the bodacious blonde barrister babe, had anything to do with it. Like, I don't know anything about that firm, and I would bet that if somebody's buying off a judge, even if it was the firm, which I don't know if it was the firm, it could have been somebody that John's lawyer didn't even know, or it could have been somebody that John's lawyer knew, but talked to somebody who talked to somebody who talked to somebody. There could be so many layers of this, or it could have been John, or it could have been somebody that John knew, or somebody at John's, some company that John might have been affiliated with. You have no idea, so you can't speculate about these things. But I'm not speculating when I say that Curry was bought, or somebody like had his wife kidnapped. That I'm sure of. A case going that insanely awry, it just doesn't happen. I was in the thing for 15 years. So that happened. And then just to wrap up the story, quite a while later, after Jane had lost absolutely everything, well, I mean, she still had various weekends with the child, but she had no way of living with the way she was financially decimated. Decimated doesn't even cover it, really. Then I got an email from John Howe's lawyer that says, we don't think that Jane is complying with all aspects of the trial judgment, and we think she ought to be held in contempt of court and go to jail. And that's where I very consciously, it wasn't written in anger, I very consciously wrote back to John Howe's lawyer, who I'm not saying bought off Curry. I don't know who bought off Curry. I'm sure that the lawyer didn't even know about it when it happened. It was done through layers and layers and layers. I wrote back to her saying, in essence, you better put me in jail first. And not too long after that, I got capped. I got suspended and ultimately disbarred from the Law Society, but this isn't about me. Why am I telling you this story as a very long response to the question of what Saskatchewan lawyer should I hire? You have to be aware of the fact that that kind of thing has happened. And I did hundreds of cases. I only saw 3 where something obviously corrupt happened, where my spidey sense of corruption went up. Just those 3. So I'm not telling you that it's going to happen. I'm just telling you that in a fairly long career, I saw it happen 3 times, and one of them was this, and this is the hardest one to talk about. Why is it the hardest one to talk about? Because it was a trial, and I'm generally a believer in trials. But it was a family trial, meaning the people cannot be named. I can't tell you who Grant Curry did this to. And as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been reported. I'll put up the court file number, but that's of very little use to you. You can call the courthouse and they aren't able to tell you anything about it either. But this is a real file and this really all happened. So to go back to the story, John Howe's lawyer wrote to me, said, we think that Jane ought to be held in contempt and she ought to be locked up. I wrote back, you better lock me up first, which is not a polite thing for a lawyer to write to another lawyer. A month or 6 weeks or so later, I get capped. And now I'm making this video. What's the moral of that story for somebody like Tammy or somebody in Saskatchewan? Well, if you were Jane, the best thing to do in that situation would be not to get a lawyer at all. And I'm not saying don't get a lawyer. I'm just saying for Jane, looking back on that, she got that atrocious, ridiculous decision from Curry after having spent all her life savings and, borrowing the life savings of others to get that, when really she would have been better off just saving that money for an appeal. So I don't know if that's the right thing. I can't say if that's the right thing for somebody in Tammy's position to do. But if it seems like I've got my mind on other matters, yeah, kind of. Like a part of me is always thinking about Jane Smith, because it's I'll find the quote, but there's a great quote by G.K. Chesterton about how he bases his whole philosophy on what's good for a little girl. I'll put the quote up here and you can see it. But like Jane Smith kind of is Chesterton's little girl, just grown up and with a little boy of her own. And when she gets brutalized and robbed and completely failed by the system like that, a part of my mind is always on that. And so Lacey Joyce and I have been talking about this issue of judicial corruption. Like Ben knows Lacey Joyce, and Lacey's very brilliant. And Lacey always says that men never give women credit for the great ideas that the men claim to have, and men pound them off as their own. So Lacey and I were talking about corruption, and I was saying, look, if I'm right that Curry and Popescule and one other guy have been bought, how are they getting bought? Like, nobody's meeting them in the back alley, handing them a bag of cash. Nobody's sending bank transfers. It's too easily traceable. And so we were just talking about a case in Alberta where some rich business tycoon had given expensive Oilers tickets, or maybe passes to the Skybox or the luxury suite, to a politician, and had let a politician or a politician's close family members or loved ones live in a house at what may or may not have been a discounted rate. And so Lacey said, I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, but maybe the judges are being bought in the same way, in a way that's not traceable, with things like luxury boxes, with travel, private jets, just the way that we worry about politicians being bought. And that really struck a chord with me, because it would be like, if I'm right that these three judges allowed themselves to be bought, that would be a way you could allow yourself to be bought and not have a lot of fingerprints on it, right? If you were staying at somebody's palatial cabin at the lake, or if you were using somebody's beautiful villa in Puerto Vallarta, and if you were using somebody's chartered jet to get there, or if you were going to see a Shania Twain concert or something, you had the best seats because you were in somebody's luxury box, or you were going to see the Oilers or something like that. Those are things that wouldn't be traceable. It would be really depressing, because it would remind me of, there was a story I read once about a local Soviet commissar back in the USSR days who was corrupt, and his car was surrounded by the townspeople, and they opened up his trunk and they found it full of sausages and kielbasa, and it's just so petty, so pathetic. It's like that line from Bolt's A Man for All Seasons, where Thomas More says to a little guy who sold his soul, he says, it profits a man nothing to gain the whole world and lose his soul. But for whales,
The Red Dragon. What's this?
Sir Richard is appointed Attorney General for Wales.
For Wales. Why, Richard, it profits a man nothing to give his soul for the whole world. But for Wales.
This was a guy who had accepted a post in Wales in exchange for his soul. And so, like, to sell your soul for a trunk full of kielbasa, to sell your soul for luxury boxes and luxury travel, it's so ridiculous. So that's just speculation, something that we're working on. So I know I'm taking a long time in answering this question of which Saskatchewan clownfish lawyer would I choose if I had to choose one. In the last video I did, I made a reference to Chernobyl, like how the Chernobyl disaster was the result of people running a nuclear power plant the way it ought not to be run, disabling all the safety systems, running it like a bunch of yokel cowboys, not knowing the horrible power that they were dealing with, and the result was a big toxic disaster. And that's similar to what's happening in Saskatchewan's courts right now, and why I'm not in that biz anymore. So in the last video I said that it's like Pripyat in the Call of Duty game. Pripyat being the town near the Chernobyl plant. But actually were more like this from the HBO series Chernobyl. We're more like that, where the disaster is happening and unfolding in front of everybody's eyes, but most people don't know that it's a disaster yet. So it's a bit of a difficult thing for somebody like me to focus on one particular issue like this, but I'm trying to do it. So if you want to skip ahead to the happy ending when there is one, the way that the problem in the court ultimately gets resolved is not really political. It's just fixing some design flaws in the current system. Prohibiting judges from giving legal advice. It was an insane idea that our parents' generation had that has proven a total and complete disaster, fiasco. Judges can't give legal advice. Judges can't work in secret anymore. That's got to be taken away from them. And people will realize that judges can't, just like cops can't do their job in secret. Like if a cop says to you, I'm going to get a confession out of you, and now I'm going to turn off this video camera, and I'm going to turn off this tape recorder, and we're going to get ourselves a confession, you're going to know that's not a good situation. And the third way to fix it is to have all of the judge's record on a website. Whatever the judge does, let's just see everything the judge writes and everything the judge says. It's totally doable. I understand that there are serious concerns about allowing video cameras in courtrooms. In other jurisdictions like the United States, some places they do that, and it leads to judges showing off for the cameras. But just plain old text, to have the text of all the judges' interactions, all of the judges, behavior in court, unless there's a good reason, like it has to be redacted for a solid publication ban reason. In the future, everything a judge does in his or her judgely duties is going to be on a website. And you're thinking, well, there already are websites. There's Westlaw, there's Lexis. Yeah, but those are selective. I'm talking about a public website that everybody can see. There's absolutely no reason why we can't have that in the future, especially with the voice to text that we've got and the aggregation and all the horsepower we've got in our computers right now. That's going to happen in the future. And you're saying to yourself, well, wait, the Jane Smith trial was a trial, so why are you arguing to get rid of the secret pre-trials and other secret things to remedy the trial? It's all kind of connected, actually, because the court really doesn't want to run trials. They're not shy about telling you this. We don't have the resources to run trials there, and so they'll tell you trials are stressful, trials are unpredictable. It could go any way. You ask 10 judges, you'll get 11 different answers. They want to sow this uncertainty, this vagueness, this opacity, this fear. That all feeds into their goal, the machine's goal, of having more and more things settled in secret proceedings, which is what a pretrial is. So when Curry does something completely insane, like what he did to Jane Smith, it actually works toward that goal, because then it actually fits in with the narrative of, you don't want a trial. Anything could happen at trial. No, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Like, judges are supposed to be able to make a reasonably competent decision that fits with the law, not this monstrosity that Curry came up with. Curry has a show coming up, by the way. I think it's June 20th at the Basement. And nobody messes with Curry. We're not advocating anybody showing up at his show and heckling him. I certainly wouldn't do that. I mean, it's enough that the guy sold his soul for whatever he sold it for. It just couldn't have been worth it. So what does that mean for somebody like Tammy who wants a lawyer and has to choose one? Well, it really depends on a lot of circumstances. if I knew more, I might be able to say more. But I promised Ben that I'd get something out today, and I'm kind of stretching the definition because I haven't gone to bed yet, but it's morning. I've been up worrying about this just because telling the Jane Smith story is really hard for me. So sorry about that. Sorry for the long answer, but that's what I got for today.